Austin Faith Dialogue, a public affairs program at the crossroads of religion and life. A series of programs highlighting the social and cultural interaction between the worshiping and larger communities in and around the capital city. Austin Faith Dialogue is brought to you by the Austin Area Conference of Churches in cooperation with KTBC. Join us now in today's Austin Faith Dialogue.
Hello, I'm Barbara Holmes, staff person in the district office of the United Methodist Church here in Austin, and your host for today's Austin Faith Dialogue. This religious public affairs program is brought to you by the Austin Area Conference of Churches in cooperation with KTBC. The religious community in Austin reflects the diversity and variety of cultures existing in our community at large. Some of the cultures were brought to Texas with the earliest settlers, while others have found a place in the community in the more recent past. Today, we'll look at some of the ethnic groups who maintain the language and culture of their heritage or country of origin as they practice their religion. German and Swedish settlers formed some of the earliest congregations in Austin. This past September, an all-Swedish worship service at Decker United Methodist Church was one event in a year-long celebration of the 150th anniversary of the first Swedish settlers in Texas. The Unity of the Brethren denomination still uses Czech language hymnals at special events. Hispanic congregations have existed in Texas and the Austin area before we were a state. There are Black Baptist, Methodist, and African Methodist Episcopal churches in Austin that are some of the oldest in the state. But the newcomers to Austin have formed congregations also. There are Korean, Vietnamese, and Chinese congregations of several denominations that worship in their native language. Let's meet some representatives of these congregations who are our guests today. And I'd like to welcome each of you to this program. This is Father Joe Wynn, pastor at St. Joseph's Catholic Community that's located in Manor. This is Reverend Patricia Spearman, the pastor serving at St. Annie's African Methodist Episcopal Church. And this is Reverend Kim, pastor of the Korean Baptist Church in Austin. We're going to visit about several things, some of your background, but I think the viewers would be interested in knowing a little bit more about your congregation. Father Joe, let's start with you. Tell us a little bit about St. Joseph's Community, how old it is, its size, and a little bit about your congregation.
St. Joseph Church is a very own community, but in 1987, Bishop John McCarthy assigned me to be a pastor to St. Joseph Church in Manor, and I have a full-time job to local people and the Vietnamese Catholic people. And I can serve the people in different races, Mexican American people, Anglo, Vietnamese. So we have different services on Sunday. I have 3 services on Sunday, 2 in English and 1 in Vietnamese. We usually have a Vietnamese Mass at 4 o'clock for Vietnamese people in Austin.
You mentioned the bishop appointed you to that congregation, but how old is the St. Joseph's community? Wasn't it started the Vietnamese congregation, wasn't that started some time ago?
Yeah, if you talk about Vietnamese congregation, I have to go back to 1975. Yeah, when I first came to this diocese, and I was appointed to work at Sacred Church in Austin, and I formed a very small group of Vietnamese Catholic people when we had services over there for over 10 years. And I just told you that when I came to Maine and we moved our services and our own kind of activities to St. Joseph in Maine.
So really, the congregation has been formed since 1975 and met all of that time until last year at Sacred Heart Church here in Austin. And I guess you've just grown to the point that you needed to get out in the wide open spaces, and so now you're worshiping at Manor. But I imagine quite a few of the people still come from Austin.
Yeah, most of them from
in your
Austin,
Vietnamese congregation.
Vietnamese congregation. Even now we use the St. Joseph Church for the Vietnamese services, but you know, you cannot come and say, oh, hey, this is your church. So Vietnamese people, Catholic people, I mean, still thinking about having their own church.
Ah.
Yes, and maybe someday I think they will have their own church and they can have services in their language.
Well, we'll want to come back to that, but let's learn a little about these other congregations. Reverend Spearman, you're the pastor at St. Annie's African Methodist Episcopal Church, and you may need to tell us a little bit about your denomination, the African Methodist Episcopal denomination.
Well, actually, I've been serving in the capacity of assistant pastor since the pastor's been ill. The African Methodist Church is actually a branch, we branched off from the Methodist Church initially because of some of the racial turmoil that existed in the late 1700s. By no means does the word African more or less suggest that it's only for blacks, because we do have members of the Anglo persuasion. There are some Hispanics. Here in the Austin area, there are about 7 African Methodist Episcopal churches.
There are 7.
There are 7. Some of the older churches that are most people in Austin would be familiar with would be Metropolitan or Grant Chapel. Metropolitan being about 117 years old, and it is a historic landmark. The church that I serve at is about 72 years old, and it's in an older part of South Austin, and most of the families that worship there are part of the original families that actually started St. Annie. As a matter of fact, one of the ministers who serves there, his wife who just recently passed, her grandmother and grandfather were the ones that started St. Annie.
So there are 7 congregations here, and they range from the kind of downtown churches. You said Metropolitan and Grant Chapel are 2 that I think are around 12th Street.
Yes.
And so that's real helpful. Let's look now. Reverend Kim, your situation is you are pastor of a Southern Baptist, Korean-speaking congregation.
Yes.
How old is it? How did it get started?
Well, when I was attending Southwestern Baptist Theological Seminary, I was commuting to Austin, and I began door-to-door witnessing, and with the sponsorship from University Baptist Church, it began in February 1985.
1985. But you were a seminary student at Fort Worth. That's
Yes.
a tremendous amount of work and distance. Now, tell us a little about the congregation, where it meets, how many folks, what sort of activities you have.
We meet at University Baptist Church, and they have been generous letting us use their facilities. We have 2 Sunday worship services, one in the morning and one in the evening, and Wednesday night evening service, and we have district home fellowship services on Fridays, bi-weekly Friday nights.
And students are a large part of your congregation?
Yes, about over 90% are made up of UT students. Most of them are graduate students, and we have about 60 undergraduate students.
Most of them are graduate students and about 60 undergraduate students.
Right.
So the graduate students may be married and have families.
That's right, yes.
So that would be a rather large number.
On Sunday mornings, we have altogether over 200. It began just with one family, but over the 3.5 years, it grew to 200.
That's a very enthusiastic start for a young congregation. When you mentioned the seminary where you were attending in Fort Worth, Pat, although you are ordained and serving in a capacity at a congregation, you're also a student at the Episcopal Seminary of the Southwest here in Austin.
Yes, I am.
Tell us a little about how that came to be. You're serving in a denomination, and yet you have, something has led you to study. And so what are your plans as far as, why are you going to seminary now?
A lot of people have asked me that question. I've actually been in the ministry about 27 years, and about 3 years ago, in talking with a very dear friend of mine who had also gone through the seminary, the Episcopal Seminary, I decided that in order to enhance my ministry and better prepare myself for service to the church in the future, in these changing times, that I'd like to pursue some formalized degree or some formal study. In looking around, I like Austin. As a matter of fact, I've fallen in love with it. And I looked at the Episcopal Seminary. I liked the program. I walked around campus and began to talk with some of the instructors and some of the students. And last fall, I entered the seminary. I'm now in my second year, and I'm loving every minute of it. I'm having ambiguous feelings about completing the program in 1990 when I hope to graduate. But I certainly do hope to serve the church as a full-time minister. That is really my first love. Of all the things that I do, the ministry is my first love. And I know that in our church, because a lot of things are changing rather rapidly, there will be room for women on a larger scale and in various capacities, if not in the pastorate, then perhaps in Christian education or in some other fields where we can make an impact as well as serve as role models for other youngsters who are coming up.
But you do want to be in parish ministry,
Yes,
if at all possible,
Yes, I
not a chaplaincy or a special appointment.
My first love is the pastorate.
When you talked about how much you liked Austin, Father Joe, I'd like to ask you, now, you were a parish priest when you lived in Vietnam. You're now serving this parish in Austin, but tell us a little bit about your work when you were living in Vietnam. What community, what town, and what was the size of your congregation in Vietnam?
Well, Barbara, I was ordained in 1968, and my first assignment was to work in the very rural mission church. Actually, I was an assistant pastor, but I did not live in with the priest. I lived in the school, because I had a school, and I was the principal of the junior high, and I taught school for 2 years. And in 1970, I was appointed to establish a printing house and publish a monthly magazine for my diocese, Long Xuyên Diocese, just about 150 miles south of Ho Chi Minh City, formerly Saigon capital. So actually, I just worked in the parish, for 2 years, and I was helping out in the on the weekend.
And working with the school. And so you are getting a full dose of parish ministry here in Austin and the Austin area. As we speak of his homeland, Reverend Kim, you're very committed, obviously someone who is carrying a scholastic load of a seminary student, commuting a distance to help invite people into the church. Did you grow up in the Christian faith, and how did you decide that the ordained ministry was the life for you?
Yes, I grew up in a Christian family. Actually, I was Presbyterian when I was in Korea, but since I came to America in 70s, I got to meet with Southern Baptist pastor, and I just changed my membership to Southern Baptist. I was going through hard times in college years, and there was some kind of tragedy in my family. And right after I got married, God called me to the ministry. But I had to struggle with that for 8 months. Lord, look at my life. I'm not changed. I am very lazy person. I'm not equipped for the ministry, and I struggled for 8 months, but finally I gave up, thinking inside that seems like Holy Spirit was telling me that I know your situations, I know your lifestyle, but it is I, the Lord, who is calling you to the ministry. And to that point, if God wants me to the ministry, who am I saying no? Is my standard higher than God's standard? And when I thought that way, I finally had a peace in my heart. Then if you wanted me to the ministry, then I'm here, and use me.
And you began your seminary education and the steps to being answering the call responsibly.
Yes.
Well, appreciate your sharing that. The call has come to many people in different ways. Last week, I interviewed Reverend Joaquin Figueroa, a pastor of a new congregation, relatively new congregation here in Austin, San It's a Lutheran congregation, St. Luke. San Lucas is its Spanish name, and it is a relatively young congregation with a brand new pastor. You're a relatively new pastor with a relatively new congregation. Why don't you tell us a little about your congregation?
Okay. San Lucas is really a new congregation. It began in 1983 as a part of St. John's Lutheran Church ministry. But in June 85, the Lutheran Church decided to start a Hispanic congregation. So we are now in our 3rd year.
And you meet where?
We meet at the St. John's Lutheran Church.
So you
Sunday.
share
Yes.
facilities with kind of the parent church that you
Yes.
grew out of.
Yes, our congregation is in Spanish. All of our services are in Spanish. Sundays at 12:15, and we got Bible class at 11.
So you have a full range of worshiping and educational activities. And do you have other activities, mission, outreach?
Yes, we have Bible classes Tuesday, and we have a prayer group every Friday. The prayer group is in different homes, and we got some services for the community. As a matter of fact, the past year, we got more than 200 people who attend for help in the immigration case. Through the amnesty, we were able to help some people to get the residence.
Oh, I'm sure that was a tremendous service to those people.
I think so.
You are a relatively new pastor, as I said. Tell us a little bit about yourself and your background.
I came to the United States in 1980 because of the political violence in El Salvador.
That's your home.
Yes, my first career is I'm a lawyer. I was teaching at the University of El Salvador for 9 years before coming to the United States, and I was practicing law for 18 years. But as I said before, 1980, I came to this country, and I was involved with Alcoholics Anonymous, and I was trying to start a branch in Spanish. And at that time, I was converted into Christianity. Well, not into Christianity, but I am a former Roman Catholic, and I became Lutheran in 1982.
But you felt called to the ministry as you were serving, working with Alcoholics Anonymous, and you decided it was ordained ministry rather than the legal field for you.
Well, yes, I was knocking doors, trying to start a group, and I was trying to help some people who had some problem with alcohol and drugs. So I began to think that in some way the good Lord was calling me to work as a minister. So that is why I began to think about it, and I am really happy to get it now.
And you went to a Lutheran seminary, the one here in Austin?
Yes, 1982 I began my seminary training, and I graduated in 1985.
And so you're the first pastor for that congregation?
Yes, I am. Yes, I am. We got together some 60 people every Sunday, and we are really happy that we are growing in number, but also we are growing in services for the community. Yes.
With that conversation, we've heard of Spanish-speaking congregations. We're talking about English-speaking, Korean, Vietnamese, and there are such a number of ethnic congregations here in Austin. I know there's a Korean United Methodist, a Korean Presbyterian, and then you lead the Korean Baptist congregation, and there may be others. You've said there is a Vietnamese Catholic congregation that meets at St. Mary's, and I know from the United Methodist congregation there's a a Korean Student Association that's really rather a large group. Do you have any idea how many students that might be?
There are about 350 graduate students and about 200 undergraduate students.
So 300, 200, there's about 500 in the student, and there's some permanent residents here in Austin.
There are about 150 family.
So that's a sizable number. And I was visiting with the staff person at Caritas that does refugee resettlement. He said the Southeast Asian population in the Austin area was over 8,000. I thought that was an awfully large number. And that many people in one place would want to continue their cultural traditions. Tell us, what are some things about your Vietnamese culture that you bring to your worship service?
Here in Austin, I think that we have from 5,000 to 8,000 Vietnamese, but we have just about over 400 Catholic Vietnamese people, and most of Vietnamese people here, they belong to the different denomination, and I think that in the Catholic Church we don't have a much different in the services. We belong to Roman Catholic Church, so in my country, in Vietnam, or here in the United States, we use the same service, but just a different language. So I would say that like the music we use in the service, music instrument, we use in church. We use organ and guitar, so something like that, and I think that's pretty same,
So the language is the major difference.
Yes.
And Pat, what would you say from the culture that comes to life in the services in your congregation?
I would say that the word itself is emphasized, but a lot of the emotion that is contained within the black experience is also expressed during the religious worship service. So that would be the one thing that we have maintained in our worship service.
Very much a part of how
Very
you
much
worship.
the emotion and the music, the expression of self, as it were, not only of the ministers, but of the laity as well. So there's complete involvement in the spirit, not only from a cognitive, but from an affective level also.
And my observation is that there's such a strong sense of family also as the congregation worships.
There's a Satterwhite family there at St. Annie, and when Mother Satterwhite comes on Sunday, everyone is there. So there is definitely a unity, the matriarch type of involvement in church, and we've maintained that. It's a real close-knit, very friendly church right there in the heart of South Austin.
Well, quickly, as we conclude, tell us some of the things that are uniquely happen in your congregation because it's a Korean congregation.
Well, we have daily 5:30 a.m. Prayer service, and there's no national holiday that stops that. So 365 days a year, we gather together corporately at the chapel, and we sing hymns, and I preach about 10 minutes, and then each of us kneel down and pray his own prayer, and go home freely whenever he is through. There's no set time of ending the prayer service.
That is just wonderful. We are absolutely out of time. We've learned so much. You've enriched our lives so much. Thank you.
Thank you, Barbara.
Hope that you all have enjoyed hearing from these representatives of a much wider, rich cultural heritage here in Austin. Thank you for watching. Join us next week for Austin Faith Dialogue. Good day.